0.5 miles. That's the length of the runway at a small to medium-sized airport. That's how long some freight trains can be, or 7 soccer fields lined up end to end. And that's how long Jill Meagher's walk home is. 700 meters is a distance that's hardly worth mentioning. Or at least it shouldn't be. Because even though Jill's walk home is so short, even though the streets are lined with streetlights, and even though there's a lot going on in the streets that night, Jill won't make it home. She'll disappear on her way home. And for the Melbourne police, a race against time begins. Gillian McKeon calls 2 continents home and has done so since her early childhood. Although she was born on October 30th, 1982 in Ireland, she went to school in Australia. That's because her father got a job in Perth in the late 1980s. In Australia, Jill had some of the most formative experiences of her life. She first attended elementary school, then high school, made friends, and discovered hobbies. She was particularly passionate about acting. In 1996, when she was 14, the family moved back to Ireland. And so it was that, as a young woman, Jill eventually went on to study there. She earned her bachelor's degree at the University of Dublin, and right after that, she lands a job that many graduates can only dream of. She starts working at the Irish broadcaster RTE. Around this time, she also meets her boyfriend, Thomas Meagher. In 2008, the two decide to get married. However, they don't plan to stay in Ireland. They want to build their future together in Australia. Professionally speaking, this works out quite smoothly. Thanks to her experience at RTE, Jill was able to make a strong impression in job interviews. This led to her landing a job at the Australian television network ABC. And since Jill's parents had also moved back to Australia by then, saying goodbye to Ireland was perhaps only half as hard for her. Jill and Thomas found a centrally located rental apartment in Brunswick, a neighborhood in Melbourne. The two were thinking about starting a family. Things were going really well for Jill at work. She actually works mostly behind the scenes at ABC, but every now and then she gets to go on the air live for one of the ABC radio programs. Jill is at the office on September 21st as well. At 7:50 a.m., she says goodbye to her husband Thomas at home. He already knows that it's sure to be a late night for his wife tonight. It's her colleague Courtney's birthday, and she's celebrating at a nearby art gallery. Together with another colleague, Jill kicks off the end of the workday early with a round of cider. The two of them stroll through the neighborhood, checking out the new items in the store windows. Afterward, they head to the Fad Art Gallery. At 9 p.m., Jill and 3 other coworkers decide to head out again. One of them, Tom Wright, also has something very special to celebrate. He recently found out that he's going to be a father for the 2nd time. So Jill, Tom Wright, and 2 other coworkers who are friends raise a toast at a bar. Jill even sends her husband Thomas a text message asking if he'd like to join them. But he doesn't see the message. He himself has come home after a long day at work and fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted. Jill also texts a friend to ask if she'd like to join them, but she's already too tired as well. So, it's just the 4 of them, having a few drinks and simply enjoying themselves. The evening ends there, however, somewhat abruptly. The bar closes at 1 a.m., and somehow the friends never got around to having a proper nightcap. So Jill and Tom Wright head a little further down the road to Bar Etiquette on Sydney Road. The atmosphere here is cozy, and best of all, You can still get one last drink here. That's all Jill and her remaining companion end up having. After all, they'd been working all day before heading out to the bars, so they're starting to get tired. While Jill lives very close by, Tom definitely needs to call a taxi. He suggests that Jill just ride along for the short trip. The taxi driver could simply drop her off right at her front door. Jill and her husband Thomas live just 5 minutes away from the bar in Luxway. But that's exactly why Jill insists she can easily make the short walk home on her own, just as she has done many times before. Tom offers twice for her to hop in the taxi with him, but she waves him off. Tom looks down the street where they are standing. Everything looks well lit, and there are still plenty of people out and about, so he lets his colleague go on her way. Around 1:30 a.m., Jill leaves the bar. This marks the beginning of the final minutes of her life. Meanwhile, Jill's husband Thomas is in for a restless night. He has since woken up from his nap on the couch. He had expected his wife to be home by now when he opened his eyes again, but the apartment is empty. It's not super late yet, it's just before 2 a.m., but Jill has been up since early this morning. Thomas figures she should be home soon. Between 2 and 6 a.m., he tries to reach Jill on her cell phone pretty much non-stop. At 4 a.m., he can't stand being at home any longer and goes out on his own to look for his wife. When that turns up nothing, Thomas contacts the police directly. As early as Saturday morning, they issue a missing person report for Jill Meagher. In the meantime, Thomas has also called all the hospitals in the area, but unfortunately, to no avail. This makes it all the more important to quickly piece together the events of the night of September 21st to 22nd, 2012. Jill's brother Michael is the first to provide details. Jill had used her brief trip home to make a quick phone call. Her father had recently suffered a stroke, and she wanted to get an update on his condition. When Jill hung up, she sounded worried, her brother says. Not because she sensed any immediate danger, but simply because she was worried about her father. The phone call narrows down the time frame during which Jill was missing even further. It isn't until after 48 hours of searching that the first lead emerges. Jill's purse is found, just 20 meters from Sydney Road, on a side street called Hope Street. The strange thing is that the police had actually already searched this exact area the day before. Consequently, the suspicion arises that the bag might have been placed there by a perpetrator to throw investigators off the trail. This is also the moment when the homicide division takes over. Jill's credit card, and thus her most obvious valuable item, is still in the bag. Her cell phone, however, is missing. This too suggests that someone is actively trying to cover their tracks. They look into the immediate surroundings of the potential victim, so Jill's husband Thomas is questioned in detail once again. On Tuesday afternoon, there is also a search of the Meaghers' home. For 5 hours, the police remain in Jill and Thomas's shared apartment, collecting 6 bags of potential evidence. Over the course of the afternoon, the apartment is so swarming with police officers that even Thomas can't move around freely within his own 4 walls. After the police have technically already finished, they return that same evening to take even more items with them. Nevertheless, the police quickly take the wind out of the press's sails. Thomas is not a suspect in his wife's disappearance. That's because there's suspicious surveillance footage. Surveillance camera footage from Sydney Road shows Jill, and most likely the suspect in this case. The first footage was captured at 1:34 a.m. near the chemist warehouse. Jill pauses briefly to talk with a group of 3 people. One person from the group briefly hugs her, so it seems she ran into an acquaintance. At 1:36 a.m., Jill is already walking past the Crust Pizza pizzeria again. Much more important are the recordings taken shortly afterward. The footage comes from a bridal shop called Duchess. The view is partially obstructed by mannequins in the store door, but you can still make out quite a bit. The footage is from 1:38 a.m. Here, in front of the bridal shop, she has already covered almost half the distance home. She looks at her cell phone, and at times, it seems as though she's a bit unsteady on her feet. Above all, however, Jill is not alone in this footage. You can see that she's talking to someone, a man wearing a blue hoodie. You can also see that several people walk past the store during this time, and thus past Jill and the unknown man. In addition, cars, taxis, and a train pass by. This gives the police hope that witnesses will come forward. As a result, they decide to release the footage immediately. The case is one of the first that could be followed and commented on virtually in real time on the internet. A Facebook page for the missing Jill had tens of thousands of likes after just a few days. Through this page, several women came forward to report that they had been harassed on Sydney Road in the past. And that sums up quite well what many people didn't understand about the Jill Meagher case at first. Sydney Road is extremely busy. But the thing is, assaults on women often take place right in the middle of all the activity. And one user even has a very specific lead. She believes she saw both Jill and the man in the blue hoodie on Sydney Road. More specifically, she says she saw Jill run away from this man. And just a few hours later, the police find Jill and her killer. On the afternoon of September 27th, the comment sections on Jill's page and other regional news sites exploded with activity. This was because word had leaked out that someone had been arrested in connection with the Jill Meagher case. The suspect is reportedly a man who was arrested at his home in Coburg. The police tracked him down using an investigative method that is quite common for us today: cross-referencing cell phone GPS data. The police first tracked the GPS data from Jill's cell phone. Then they checked to see if there were other phones that had moved in parallel with hers. And that's exactly where they found the decisive match. Jill's cell phone and that of a man named Adrian Bailey moved virtually in sync through Brunswick, along a network of highways and the Calder Freeway, all the way to Sunbury. Bailey immediately broke down during questioning. But that also means there is now a sad certainty. Because, as Adrian Bailey told the police, Jill is no longer alive. He told the police that he didn't want to hurt Jill. It was supposed to be a planned assault. That's how an Australian news portal later reported it. Ultimately, that's what he did. Because she fought back and threatened to call the police, he lost control, according to Bailey. At 10 p.m., Bailey led the police to a quiet spot on Black Hill Road in Gisborne South. This location is not far from Sunbury, where his and Jill's cell phones were last logged in. Here, about 50 kilometers from Melbourne, Bailey attempted to dispose of the murder victim's body. Jill lies here, buried in a shallow grave by the roadside. In the middle of the night, at 1:45 a.m., Adrian Bailey is officially arrested for Jill's murder. He is the man in the blue hoodie whom Jill spoke to on Sydney Road. Neighbors describe Adrian Bailey as the typical guy next door. He reportedly went to the gym often and is the father of several children. It is said that Adrian and the children's mother married right away when they were 18, but separated after 6 years of marriage. He had 2 more children from another relationship in the mid-90s. That relationship didn't last either. He moved into a rental apartment in Coburg 6 months before Jill's murder. It turns out that on the night of the crime, Adrian Bailey was out in Melbourne with his girlfriend at the time. The two were first at the Quiet Man Hotel, and from there they went to a club called The Lounge. At the lounge, the two got into an argument. It was about Bailey's possessive behavior and his jealousy. As a result, his girlfriend secretly slipped away in a taxi. After midnight, he therefore drove back home to Coburg. However, he didn't do this to let the matter go and calm down. Instead, he changed clothes at home, threw on the blue hoodie, the one he was later seen wearing in the surveillance footage, and drove back to Melbourne to Sydney Road. There, he ran into Jill and dragged her into a backyard off the street where he assaulted her. Jill reportedly fought back vigorously and said she would call the police. As a result, Bailey ultimately murdered her. At first, he even simply left Jill's body lying in the backyard. It wasn't until 4:20 a.m., when Jill's husband Thomas was already searching the streets for his wife, that Bailey returned to the crime scene. He had driven home beforehand to get a shovel. Using that shovel, he then loaded Jill into the trunk of his car at around 4:25 a.m. and set off for Gisborne South. The day after the crime, Bailey stopped by an auto repair shop. He had the trunk lining and all 4 tires replaced. He destroyed Jill's phone, as he admitted to the police. The fact that Adrian Bailey attacked Jill Meagher, of all people, was nothing but a coincidence. It could have happened to any woman. The public outcry has been immense, especially once it became known what Bailey had done in the past. Adrian Bailey's criminal record spans 2 decades. He first committed a crime at the age of 19 for sexual abuse in 2 separate cases. He was actually sentenced to 5 years in prison for these offenses. However, he served only 22 months of that sentence. Officially, he was released early because he participated in an offender rehabilitation program. However, Bailey now admits that, as he puts it, he faked his way through the program. Starting in 2000, he committed at least 5 more crimes. All of them were additional cases of assault. Although another prison sentence followed, it was only 8 years. And this despite the fact that the 5 offenses involved him sometimes even locking the women in his car in order to assault them. When he committed the crime against Jill, he had been free for 4 years. Technically, he was on probation, but he had violated the terms of his probation as recently as February 2012. That time, he punched a man unconscious in a bar. Bailey pleaded guilty to assault in this case. Although the presiding judge sentenced him to 3 months in prison, Bailey appealed the decision, and his appeal was granted. Ultimately, the assault had no consequences for him. And so, on September 22, 2012, he was able to drive to Sydney Road and take Jill Meagher's life there. While in pretrial detention, he revealed to a psychologist that he had apparently tried to touch and kiss Jill. However, she fought back by slapping him. Bailey reportedly said that because he felt so rejected, he lost his temper and wanted to force his will on her even more. When Jill continued to resist, he strangled her. According to this psychologist, Bailey claimed to have been physically abused by his father since he was 9 years old. He also stated that he had been abused by a relative 6 years his senior. The psychologist says that, in his assessment, Bailey is experiencing persistent feelings of guilt, remorse, and self-hatred. During his interrogation, Adrian Bailey reportedly cried and said he wished Australia had the death penalty. He claimed that was the only appropriate punishment for people like him. In fact, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years, which he will have to serve in any case. Before the sentencing, he officially confessed to the crime once more. Although Bailey attempted to appeal the sentence, his appeal was denied. Instead, 3 additional convictions for other crimes were added to his sentence. The women involved found the courage to come forward after Jill's case was discussed in such detail in the press. Another 18 years are added to his life sentence. Jill's widower, Thomas, has since largely withdrawn from the public eye. In the years following his wife's murder, however, he has repeatedly advocated for recognizing violence against women as a structural problem.
He's been let off too many times by our justice system, and he's just it's obviously a complete menace, and it sends out a really dangerous message to society. I think if you do this, I mean, I'm aware that his previous victims in the previous case before Jill were sex workers, and I'll never be convinced that that had nothing to do with the leniency of his sentence, which, as I said, sends a very disturbing message. Because if we say what it says to women is, be careful what you do, because if we don't like what you do, you won't get justice. And then what it says to people like Bailey is not don't, but be careful who you.
Do you think that the justice system failed your wife and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it did.
Following Jill Marr's murder, memorial events were held for her in both Australia and Ireland. Some were intended only for the family, so they could say their goodbyes. Others were public, and thousands of people turned out to honor Jill. The events also included memorial marches. At one of them, which took place on Sydney Road, as many as 30,000 people turned out. However, this memorial march was also intended as a show of solidarity with all women who fear for their lives on their way home. Jill Marr's femicide should never have happened. It can only be a small consolation that the case has, however, brought about some changes. The government of the state of Victoria has acknowledged that existing laws have failed and that stricter measures are needed to protect women in particular. A bill has been introduced to ensure that individuals who commit crimes while on probation are automatically revoked from probation or have their cases thoroughly re-evaluated. It's sad that Jill had to be murdered before such measures could be put into effect. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I can well imagine there's a lot to discuss here. By the way, this also supports the channel. You know the drill. Every like, every comment, and your subscriptions help. Thank you very much in advance. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. I hope you're having a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.